Quotations from myself, segment 56, quotation number 696. There is a moment in one's life, some arrive at it sooner than others, when one doesn't want to hear anymore about being mistaken or wrong. It usually comes with a realization that despite the frequent readiness to acknowledge and the numerous attempts to correct one's mistake in the past, neither had made one better off nor protected one from repeating the same mistakes again or making the new ones. It inevitably leads to the fatigue of the will and to resentment of the frustrated expectations and unfulfilled promises. This finally results in both implicit and explicit refusal to continue doing what has been proven again and again utterly useless. From that moment on, which is usually the moment of no return, one decides to stop admitting mistakes anymore, either to the others or even to oneself, since it doesn't do one any good anyway, and chooses to live the rest of one's life as if everything one thinks or does is absolutely right. And if nothing else, one begins at least to feel good about oneself, perhaps for the first time in one's life. (697) Writing, especially of an introspective and contemplative kind, could be looked upon as a form of conversation used by those of us who have, essentially, nobody to talk to. 698. One writes either to impress others or to please oneself. The first is done for vanity's, the second for sanity's sake. 699. The so-called demands by those who have no real power to get what they are demanding is nothing but a glorifying begging. 700. The wonderful thing about music is that if we are willing and able to surrender ourselves to it completely, it relieves us of the necessity either to sing or to do anything. The simple and seemingly effortless pleasure of just listening to music becomes, for a time or for a moment, however long it lasts, a perfect substitute for any thoughts or act, no matter how important they might be. 701. A national artistic culture is a complex living organism, the essence of which is the unique mixture produced by the combination of a particular history and geography, each of which continuously evolve and interplay from the time immemorial. It is also perpetually cross-pollinated by the neighboring cultures, or like air, culture has no borders and constantly overflows into a adjacent region and in its turn is replenished from them. As such, a national artistic culture cannot be removed and transplanted into a different environment with a different history without undergoing a fundamental transformation. Only forms of it more or less portable, but not the substance. That is why all so-called ethnic immigrant cultures, as long as they stubbornly cling to their roots, and most of them do, are condemned to remain artificial, formal, and sterile. 702. The most important question, the one that only very few are courageous enough to ask, is this: does an ordinary life, the life of misery, drudgery, the kind of life the overwhelming majority of humanity leads, worth the enormous effort each one of us has to continuously make to live it? (703) It is never too late to start a new life if the old one didn't work out. For even if one lives but a short time after death, the satisfaction of at least trying to do something about what looked for many seemingly endless years like a complete hopeless situation will make one's last days more bearable. And of course the praise and envy of those who didn't have enough courage to do the same could only enhance the feeling of finally doing something right. In case one manages to live somewhat longer after this drastic change, one gets to know how much more life has to offer, both of good and bad, which is a gift and a privilege no matter what, than one previously could hope for. Plus, hopefully, there will be enough time left to assess the wisdom of the decision, and maybe even to return, unless it's too late, back to the old life if, after the experience of the new one, it doesn't look anymore as bad as it seemed before. And finally, if one lives long enough, there is a good chance one may have another opportunity to try it all over again and experience all the above-mentioned benefits more than once. 704. For the majority of people, a continuous absence of appreciation by others of what they are and what they do brings deterioration of self-esteem and depressing, even disabling self-doubts. But not so with the driven and ambitious ones. For the less they are recognized and rewarded, the more they praise and overvalue their achievement, and especially themselves, using exaggeration and self-aggrandizement as a substitute and compensation for the unrequited need of admiration and fame. 705. Ideally, everyone would like to be an only child, and those who had to share their parents with siblings usually go through the rest of their life looking for somebody who will give them the undivided attention. Needless to say, in today's world of the rampant cult of individuality, often bordering on the outright egotism, such a search is getting to be increasingly futile. 706. Teaching is probably the only profession left after the demise of religion forced it to surrender its predominance to the secular education, in which one can repeat the same thing again and again, year after year, and still be listened to with attention and respect. And since those commodities are notoriously always in short supply, having ready access to them, albeit at times fraught with some unpleasant side effects, can be very addictive. 707. It isn't the lack of self-esteem that the majority of the so-called maladjusted people suffer from, and recovery of which is viewed as the main remedy by those who treat such people, but the lack of esteem by others, the lack of harmony between an individual's desires and capacities and his external situation, the lack of recognition and of a proper place in the society, which according to a person's self-estimation he deserves. And this, of course, no therapist can provide. What those therapists do at most is distract their patients from the understanding, admittedly potentially overwhelming, of the true reason of their unending distress, and divert their energy and efforts into a direction of the ultimate futile self-discovery. Futile because the possibility for an individual to transform oneself to suit the world is as illusory, though not as obvious, as the possibility of changing the world to suit an individual. 708. Trying to change yourself while living is like trying to rebuild your car engine while driving. 709. The main cause of the human unhappiness is a forever gnawing at our hearts and mind consciousness of unfulfilled expectations. And as the years goes by, the pain produced by this knowledge is getting progressively worse. Thus, the only people who could be called happy with any degrees of certainty are either those who can honestly say they have realized their full potentials. Unfortunately, there are too few of them, or those who have more or less successfully managed to anesthetize the awareness of not being able to do so. Fortunately, there are enough of them most of the times to maintain the societal peace, however precarious it may be. 710. Only the very lucky few are given the opportunity to reach the level of their incompetence. The rest are never allowed to get nowhere near it. The majority realize it, but vaguely, which makes them nevertheless always feel somewhat dissatisfied and perpetually driven to search for that elusive happiness. The minority are not only fully aware of their plight, but also cannot reconcile themselves to it. And as they grow older, they are getting progressively disillusioned, hopeless, and depressed, and develop as a result all kinds of psychological or even psychiatric problems. 711. Quite often in the process of conversation, some people get very surprised and upset when expecting to be talking to a mirror, which was supposed only to reflect and to echo, they find themselves faced instead with somebody else's image, which even have the audacity to talk back. 712. When we ask ourselves to understand who we are, what we really want is for them to unconditionally accept and even admire our own self-perception as the only true portrait of ourselves. In other words, we want them to look at us through our eyes and, what is more, to like what they see. When they, either implicitly or explicitly, acquiesce in it, we praise them for their ability and willingness to understand us. But when they don't, we blame them for the lack of, therefore.